You live in the area?
I live like 2 blocks away.
Oh, that's
yeah,
great.
it's great.
Okay, great.
Yeah, 2 short blocks on 260th. And so if you go to the gas station and you make a right, and like 2 short blocks is my house.
That's
yeah.
great. That's good, yeah.
We probably live like the 3rd closest to, there are 2 families who live even closer, and we're like a little bit,
That's
still
great.
pretty close.
That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, I think we're ready to start. Okay, so week 4. And as I got to week 4, contemporary considerations of design, I realized that, wow, this can really be a semester-long discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to kind of jump to, when we talk about design considerations and sacred spaces, move to contemporary considerations. So we can really look at the buildings that we have around us right now.
Before, I forget, just in my shul, this is the theme of the whole tikkun.
Oh, really?
Yes, designing of sacred spaces,
So
specifically in
interesting.
Yerushalayim. Yes, the whole tikkun.
What-
I can get you an agenda. if you
What
want to-
shul?
The conservative synagogue.
Caesar?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I would love to see.
I will get you like a program. Yeah, some really good speakers. I don't know if that'll make it. But
I would love to see it. I guess maybe before we formally start, someone invited me through Facebook to a discussion and a design program in an artist's loft in Brooklyn tomorrow night, where they're doing like designing your own sacred space, and it's 2 artists who have designed ritual objects and shuls, and they're having just a small like open
Cool.
gathering for sketching and designing space, design experience. So it's just interesting to see, like, sometimes when you start working on something, you start noticing it more, or perhaps it's just something in the air.
Actually, you know what? If you give me your email address, I'll forward you the.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. That's okay.
Oh.
I don't know if you want to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, we'll talk afterwards.
Okay.
For everyone who's watching, we're focusing on people in the room. Sorry. Okay. So we talked a little bit about design of shuls last week, and we were really looking at ancient shuls, and I feel somewhat strange skipping kind of hundreds and hundreds of years of history and moving to contemporary spaces. But given the time constraint, given the constraints, that's what I kind of want to look at today. Really post World War II, 1950s, pre-modern or modern American synagogues, and through contemporary times and certain considerations. Sort of looking at, if we can create generalities, post-World War II American synagogues, essentially there's no distinctive style for American synagogues. There's surveys of the last 50 plus years looking at different shuls, different proposals for design contests, submissions. The reality on the ground really points to the fact that there's just no one style. Normally, beforehand, lots of styles sort of reflected the time or the place where they were built. So in Europe, in pre-16th century Europe, we actually don't have a lot of information. Things were very much built out of wood, and many of them burned. But post kind of 16th, 17th century, we do see that European synagogues modeled very often the architecture of the time and the place where they're found. When we look at shuls in post-World War II America, that doesn't play out in the same kind of way. There is no one distinct style. And so lots of different styles may be inspired by different models. So just sort of some selected design inspirations. Some are inspired by the architecture of the Mishkan, the Beit HaMikdash, the Ark, shapes of Hebrew letters. Maybe there are some shul design proposals that were, supposed to be maze-like, to look like a page of Talmud, navigating your way through that, evoking birds, mountains, fire, sea, sky. All of these things sort of step in, and it's very interesting to ask sort of why. Like, why or how come there was no distinct style that panned out, right? Mm-hmm. And it could be, sort of when we look at post-Holocaust building in America, there was first kind of just a sense of lots of people were brought back to organized religion. There was a pressure to build, and a pressure to build big, and to break out with, sort of modern conceptions, blank slate, here we are in America, rebuilding from anew, and sort of modernism style stepped in. So you have a lot of buildings, and again, talking about all denominations, a lot of buildings that have a very unique sense of, that modern kind of structure, boxy on the side of the road with a Magen David, and you can kind of see that as, oh, that's the shul, sort of slapped on it, the Magen David, in this very modern kind of building. But there is this sense of, well, modernism almost stepped in a way that Judaism can be, religious observance can be anything that we want it to be on this soil, in this ground. So in one sense, that can explain why a distinct style hasn't quite happened. And there is a distinct desire, perhaps, to break from the European model, right? We don't want the cathedral-like model. So when we're building anew, it's going to look entirely different. It's going to be cleaner. And again, representing so many different styles. It could be what we want it to be. We don't have restrictions, right? Lots of European synagogues focused internally as opposed to externally because there were so many restrictions on what you can build, where you can build. Do we want them to know that we're here? So often you'll see behind courtyards and walls, and so from the outside it doesn't always reflect what actually is on the inside. And so from that stemming from that desire to break from the European cathedral-like model, oftentimes we'll see so many different styles filling the void in post-Holocaust design on the grounds in America. I'll just read one excerpt from New York Times article from December 2001, so a bit old, but right, what design for a synagogue spells Jewish? Here, confronting that question. Modernism changed the stylistic equation, making it possible for the first time to try to capture the essence of Judaism without recourse to forms associated with other cultures. That it was also suitable for religion at least nominally resistant to graven images, and one seeking after the Holocaust to break clearly with tainted European models, might explain why modernism became the de facto vehicle for a Jewish style. In 1952, a writer in the journal The Reconstructionist wrote, "A Jewish sacred space can be anywhere people assemble to read those prayers, and for a religion that emerged from the absence of architecture, the ruined temples, the finest architectural expressions may be the ones that express the least." So this sort of ties us back to our first week discussion of the emphasis on sacred time or prayers conveying the essence of religion as opposed to the structure necessarily conveying the essence of religion, which might account for why sort of a modern style stepped in that filled the void of a distinct Jewish architectural style. You will then see, right, as we'll see some case studies and examples of testing that, right? How can we, keep this modern style, but what elements we're going to add to it to make it distinctively Jewish? Does it mean just putting a Magen David on the front of it so that you know that this is Temple Beth Shalom or whatever? Or is there more of a style reflected in the actual architecture? And here's where again, another quote, "The American synagogue remains a building type in search of a meaningful form." And that's something that consistently we still see in terms of new shuls that are going up and all the very varied design plans. I saw a few different design submissions for contests or, for shul designs, just as like a survey. And they're just so varied in so many different ways that you don't see it. Right? It reflects this, on the one hand, the search for something meaningful. On the other hand, the absence kind of reflects how much possibility there really is. Right, as we talked about, the dubious reaching for an appropriate form, favoring symbolic shortcuts to make a building instantly Jewish, shows that the uses raised by post-war modern American synagogue design remain unresolved today. Right, that sense of, what are we going to do to this to make it distinctively Jewish? Do we need to? How does that go hand in hand with internal, externals, what's happening in this space? So I really wanted to spend the time on today, given that there's no real consensus on a distinct design in kind of contemporary America. What are the issues, or what are the things to consider in formulating the design of a space? And here's where I would love to hear kind of what you have to offer from what you've experienced or seen. But when we kind of think of what are the different issues, or what are the considerations in figuring out design, the first would be presence of Jewish art and symbols. And we looked at the ancient synagogues, and we saw, and the two that we saw were reflective of ancient synagogues having a lot of art. So one question we're going to ask ourselves is, to what extent is Jewish art and are Jewish symbols present in this structure? Do we see it? Do we see it a lot? The inside, the outside of the building, and again, varied. Right, that will vary from the bima is a work of art to the stained glass windows are works of art to there is no art in this sanctuary because we want the focus to be on the prayer and the people, and there's a sense that perhaps the art can be a distraction. Again, varied shuls have maybe a focal centerpiece to reflect a simplicity, a model, a pasuk integrated in, but again, varied. So that's going to be one consideration, is just what extent do we see those symbols, and is this a distinctly Jewish space, or does this space just look like an auditorium that happens to have a bima in front of the room? So one thing to consider is just the art and the symbols present in the space. Symbolism of the structure, right? Another consideration. Should the space remind us of something? Is it symbolic? Like we started at the beginning, like the Mishkan, like an ark, like a mountain, like a fire, like an eagle, all the different symbolisms that are inherent in the actual structure of this space. And that's where, sometimes, supposedly, I tried to do a lot of research about certain contemporary Batei Midrash that I had known and have been in, and we'll look at some of those pictures after. Questions of, this is supposed to be a tent, but we don't really feel that it's a tent. Or there are those that say it's supposed to resemble a fire, but the people inside don't necessarily always feel that or know that. And so there you also have kind of the contrast between what the designers and the architects have in mind with what actually translates into how you feel on the ground. So the symbolism of the structure itself. Another consideration, the placement of the religious objects inside, right? The fixtures. Where should the bima be placed? Where is there a menorah? Where will it be? How does the mechitza, we'll skip to, hang on a second, questions. It's on. Okay, when we get to mechitza, if it's an Orthodox shul, right? Presence of women in shul, how is the space configured so that it reflects the 100% population, right? Is the bima in the middle equally accessible from the men's section and the women's section? Is it not? Is it a mobile kind of bima? What does the mechitza look like within? I'm not talking about the halachic requirements for mechitza now, but even, right, we're assuming working with the minimum thresholds of the halachic requirements. There's still leeway in terms of artistic design. What's it made out of? The panel of glass. Can you see through? Can you not see through? Is it high, like higher than it needs to be? Is it curtains? Is it, right? So just that is a design aesthetic that's going to impact how the space feels.
And how people feel in the space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How people feel in the space. What image does that get when the women's section is the back as opposed to the front? The sides, the circular, the balcony. And again, so much of this will be determined by the space that you have given the real estate in the place where you live. So considerations that in an ideal world would be great to have everybody equally on one large, expansive, broad kind of design will not work in limited New York City. It may not work in limited space, expensive real estate. So again, price of real estate will impact the design, just the space that we have to work with. Accommodations, let's just go back, right? Are they a priority when you're building? The HIR, I think, was one of the first Orthodox shuls that had full handicap accessibility, not just to get into the shul, but to get to the bima, to the aron, right? You can, and even shuls that have, I think, religious, I believe that shuls are exempt from certain code requirements for handicapped accessibility. It's not the full same, they don't have to meet the same standards as other public structures. Nevertheless, right, you still have choices. To what extent are we making the whole area handicap accessible so that a person can get to every part of shul, or is it, can get into shul, have a seat, but not necessarily have an aliyah? So it's just interesting to see the 3 steps up to the bima is like, wow, if you're building a new shul, is that something that you're conscious of, or why not, and how does that play into the design?
Very important.
Windows, we talked about windows earlier on. Presence of windows, is that a plus? Like a lot of shuls now have lots of open, airy windows, and to make it feel open, airy, and do the windows represent sort of engaging the world and bringing the world in, or say bringing the prayers out? And those, again, will impact where you place the windows, how many windows, what size windows, depending on what's outside of your space, will obviously impact how many windows you have and what they look like. Stained glass windows, who's making them, who's designing them, why. And other considerations are going green. To what extent is that a priority? And here I will give credit and public kol hakavod to the Young Israel of Toko Hills in Atlanta, Georgia, that redid their shul. And just this year, I think the construction was complete, not so long ago, a few months ago. Rabbi Adam Starr is the rabbi, and it was the first Orthodox congregation. It is the first Orthodox congregation in the world to build a shul from the ground up according to totally environmentally sustainable standards. So everything about it, you can read, I'll send you this link afterwards, or you can get it online, including, we'll read his statement in a moment. It was the old shul there, but including electronic vehicle charging stations in the parking lot for not on Shabbat, obviously. It's an Orthodox, so
Right.
some people drive, but it's so that it's just an interesting thing to see. Even to me, this kind of stuck out as, wow, they're really thinking through like every aspect, not just solar panels or kind of the design meeting the requirements, but even when you're driving to shul in the morning, will there be an electronic charging station in the parking lot?
And it goes beyond just the construction of the space, because our shul, for example, got certain certification through this council for meeting environmentally aware standards. So it affects the cleaning products we use, it affects the paper goods we use, it affects everything that's, all the products that are used by the shul also.
So in addition to the structure.
Right.
Wow. And at that, okay, and in terms of, is there a catering hall in your shul? Food services?
There's a big room, but they bring in different caterers, but the caterers have to use certain paper goods, certain goods, like everything is, the paper goods are made out of corn, from agriculturally sustainable material, and as I said, all the cleaning products, the toilet paper, everything. It's a whole committee. I don't know what else is involved, but we were one of the first shuls to do that. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah,
that's really, I think, where in contemporary building and thinking, and what is this institution and how does it reflect our values, that's where things converge, and we really see, okay, are we paying lip service to certain values, or are we really implementing things that we hold to be, and values, not just Judaic per se, but sort of world values. Here is Rabbi Starr in an interview about the process and the committee, and so when they were going for green certification and green building, it said some questions were easily answered, such as how much money would be needed for the project and where the new building should be located. And so committees were formed, money was raised, properties were purchased. However, the bigger question remained how to design and build a space that would serve as the physical embodiment of our communal and religious values. And I think do you have a vegetable garden? Like,
right.
Are we teaching it just translates into every aspect of of religious life and value-laden life. Like, how do we physically embody the values that we espouse? Questions of Baal Tashchin and questions of, right, preservation of the world, and
Right.
and yeah, so it's just interesting to see to what extent are shuls thinking about this. So for their shul, it was clearly a priority, and they were very public about how they went about doing it and all the certifications. For other places, different sort of limitations, again, on the space and money and time. There, you know, I know that when the YU Beit Midrash, when they redid the Gluck Beit Midrash, one of the new Beit Midrash, Beit Midrashim at YU, there are not so many outlets, and people were complaining, can't plug in your laptop, we're all learning, but that was to meet a certain green requirement to get a grant. I don't know exactly which one, but it was a limit on electrical output in the room, in the space, which resulted in not too many outlets.
Right.
And so there you have a tension between, well, we're learning and we want to be on all sorts of technology, and we need a charge. But that's where question of values and, of course, kind of grant money, sort of all pulled together. But to what extent are people thinking about that? And I think in design considerations today with new constructions, that's a significant one. This actually is the
Very
old.
lovely.
This is the old. I put a picture in, and this is this. Is it the old shul, the new sanctuary? Okay, I can get a picture afterwards. Actually, I know that the bima is. This was just a mistake. Yeah, the bima is fully handicapped accessible. So we'll. Sorry.
That's a new one.
That is a new one. So then there was another. Okay, because. Said this probably. Rabbi Starr sent me a picture showing me that maybe from the other side. That is the new one, and it just looks okay. So then from this angle, he just sent me a picture this morning. I didn't have a chance to get it in the slideshow, but there's full handicapped accessibility up. So maybe just from this angle, it's
And what is there a mechitza there? Do you see? Is there?
Yeah, I believe there is. I think we're behind.
Oh, I see.
You see where our view is behind the mechitza. So this end looks like it would be the women's section. Okay, so let's spend some time looking at a case study of one particular shul where we could sort of say something went wrong in terms of design versus ideals versus how it all kind of played out from the end of the architect designer and the rabbi. I'll start with that question because in my mind, this case and this story just seems to be where a conflict or a small conflict played out in a very interesting way on the ground. We'll take a look at.
Wow.
This is the one shul designed by Frank Lloyd Wright,
Wow.
Beth Shalom Synagogue, in a suburb of. Hold on, I'll just go through. That's the cover of the book where it was the slide. We'll go through all of them first, actually. Right. Sorry, it's Elkins Park, Pennsylvania, suburb of Philadelphia. I'll just give you a chance to look at some of the pictures. We'll go back to them, but here was Frank Lloyd Wright's one of his early drawings of the shul of the space in 1953 is when they started construction. Right. Again, just take a look and then we'll go back to these. That's the inside. I'll go through these all in a moment, but just that's a light fixture chandelier designed by Wright.
Orthodox?
Conservative. I think I have one or two more. Sorry. Here, I just want you to get a sense of what the space looks like, and then we'll talk about the back and forth between the shul committee, the rabbi, and Wright in designing. Okay, so let's go back, just talk about the shul a little bit. again, there were so many shuls to choose from. There's so much. So this one is a famous architect, a famous shul with an interesting narrative, an interesting story written about by a professor of modern architecture at Wesleyan. Joseph Siri wrote a book about Frank Lloyd Wright's, about the shul, Beth Shalom Synagogue, and generally Wright's religious architecture. So some of the churches and cathedrals that he wrote. But this was the one shul that Frank Lloyd Wright designed. It is supposed to resemble a mountain, certainly from the outside, kind of has that sense of space. It was built, the design, it wasn't built in 1954, the building was started in 1954. It was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 2007. And interestingly, the Rabbi Mortimer Cohn, becomes a sort of co-designer with Frank Lloyd Wright. They work on it together. It wasn't just a case where, we have, probably the most important architect of the day. I mean, the most important architect alive, but one of the most important of architects of all time, who was in his 80s at the time, designing the space. And it's just interesting to see how they really kind of collaborated to some extent on what, the back and forth. There are a series of letters, is what Siri points out in his book. He kind of looks to the letters and the correspondence between the two of them in designing the space. So Rabbi Cohen, again, this is a conservative shul in the suburb of Philadelphia. Rabbi Cohen wanted a portable Mount Sinai, sort of mountain, evoking the mountain and the in its shape and imagery. And Frank Lloyd Wright liked the idea. He was okay with the idea. He actually had a pyramid shape from the 1920s in his repertoire. An unbuilt steel cathedral was called. So he had drawings, and he was happy with this space. And let's just look at, one second, some of the drawings again. Right, in one of the letters that Frank Lloyd Wright writes to Rabbi Cohen upon giving him the design plans, he states, this will be truly a religious tribute to the living God. Judaism needs one in America. To do it for you has pleased me. Here you have a coherent statement of worship. I hope it pleases you and your people. So he was, when he mailed the drawings, that's the correspondence that came along with the drawings. And there was just one feature where they really sort of disagreed, and that was the placement of the bima. Where should they put the bima in this shul? Cohen very much wanted the bima to be like a traditional, I guess, Orthodox or a traditional shul, the bima to be in the middle of the shul with kind of everyone around it and accessible, and that's a central feature of the space. And Frank Lloyd Wright resisted putting the bima in the middle of the shul. It bothered him. If you can see from this picture, there was this, hold on one moment, chandelier designed by Wright, which hung in the center, and Cohen imagined that the bima would be right beneath it as the focal point in this enormous space, which it's just an interesting question about also sort of architecture and the question of the dome. What goes beneath the dome, which has sort of been a question throughout the history of architecture, with the large cathedral-like buildings. What's in the center? And most often, there's nothing in the center. Sort of when you think about, different churches, different basilica, kind of this enormous dome that from the outside, it's like an apex. You approach it and you think, what's going to be there? And so often it's just empty space beneath that pinnacle focal point. And in traditional Jewish spaces, what's beneath the center and the dome is the bima, right? That's what draws everyone in, draws everyone together. And so in this space, there was a sort of point of contention between the rabbi and the committee, who sort of became like planning co-designers, and Frank Lloyd Wright, who he had wanted kind of beneath the chandelier to just be this kind of expansive space, whereas Shul wanted there to be, or the rabbi pretty much wanted there to be a bima, and there's just an interesting correspondence back and forth between the two of them.
It looks a little incongruent.
Yeah,
Do
here's
you
where.
think?
Hold on, let's go back. It's just hanging
Right.
in the space, and you expect there to be anchored something
right.
under it.
Yes.
So they do have they have a compromise, some sort of portable bima that can be pulled to the middle when you want it to be pulled to the middle. But again, here I chose this picture with the chuppah in the front because you see sort of an anchoring of the main space in the front, as opposed to, I think there's another picture that here from this angle you really.
Yeah.
It looks like a cathedral. I'm sorry, an auditorium or cathedral or something like waiting to happen where the action is in the front of this space. And given that it's that dome mountain-like structure from the outside, when I looked at this, let's go back to that initial picture, you sort of expect like the action to happen in the center.
Right.
And then I was surprised. I'd never been there, but I was surprised just looking at the pictures and seeing the research, seeing the reading about it, that the inside just felt like this, right? This feels like this vast kind of space with nothing really anchoring it. And that became just a point of contention in a review of Joseph Seary's book by David Galanter, who's a professor at Yale, and writing about the book. And he says, talking about the building, he says it's a tour de force as a building, but not as a synagogue. His widow, writes widow Viano, unwittingly explained the problem when she described the Great Hall. A soft silver light permeates the whole interior with a meditative quality that asks for peaceful silence. Her description is just right. Peaceful silence is perfect for a hushed audience preparing to focus its whole attention on the performers on stage. But a synagogue is designed for praise and song and chanted Torah, not silence. The great elegant room has the generic, rootless feeling of so many other monuments of liberal religion in mid-century America. And so I just thought this was sort of a fascinating interplay between what would make it distinctively feel like a shul, traditional shul, in a space with that bima, which is part of our, traditional shul should be a focal point, and then what results at it. And so there's just a lot of discussion and literature about this space. Right, Cohen wanted the Torah to be read as it used to be in most pre-modern synagogues, deep in the heart of the congregation, at the center of Wright's soaring room and right beneath the dramatic chandelier as a central focus. And Wright, when he writes back to Cohen in the letters and the correspondence, concerning the controversial bima, the more I think of so emphatic emphasis on or at the center of the synagogue, the less I like the reiteration of the chandelier. Why not let it all come along after see the auditorium all together, you and I? And I sort of bolded auditorium there just to emphasize that, right? He's not thinking like a rabbi of a shul, a religious leader gathering people in. What's that going to look like? And it's interesting how it played out. And the shul has been critiqued, even though it's a historic landmark and it's beautiful and it's interesting. Although I've heard that a few years ago the roof was leaking so bad they had kiddie pools set up to catch the water inside of it. But here you see sort of a design aesthetic that's driving what the feel inside will ultimately feel like. And again, because Frank Lloyd Wright is not necessarily, he has designed religious spaces, but not thinking per se like along the same lines of the rabbi and committee who knows. No, we want it to be the traditional feel in the center of the room. So that's where kind of things played out in terms of how design influences the feel of the space, how different parties to it will come to the table with different ideas, different conceptions, and then the results being, wow, it's lacking. And sometimes, you get to a new space and you just feel like it's amazing, and sometimes you feel like it's missing something. So this is a case where historians, critics have pointed this out. I've never been there, I've never felt it, but it just as an interesting kind of anecdote in terms of the space. By way of contrast, I just wanted to share the new construction at Lincoln Square Synagogue. which just looking at the pictures, right, just by way of contrast,
Right.
again, a design aesthetic, 613 star, lights to represent the mitzvot, and that's what's at the center, because that's, right, the circular structure is the architecture that they've had for so long,
Right.
and reusing that same space. I don't have a picture of the old sanctuary. I just have, right, that's,
What's that?
that is also, so I think this first one was the, I don't think it's photograph. I think this is actually like the digital rendering of the shul at Lincoln Square. This is a photograph of what looks like a bar mitzvah boy practicing
on
in
the
Lincoln
bima.
Square on the bima, so just from a different angle, to see from the lights. And then that is, that's the picture that appeared in the New York Times when they covered it, the blog, the New York Times blog room, city blog, whatever it's
really?
called. What is it called? City Room Blogs in January. The arrangement underscored the communal nature of the congregation. This space has become part of their iconography. I think that circular drawing everyone in was so central to Lincoln Square's congregation and the feel of the community. Obviously kept it, and that circular arrangement, they read to the mechitza and certain, maybe they read to everything, but the mechitza I think was one piece that apparently in the article it talks about it, but that needed to be replaced, and that represents what we want this space to be, as
Right.
opposed to action happening at the front. By way of contrast, the space being centered, and what's at the center. I wanted to spend the last few minutes that we have looking at Batei Midrash, kind of moving from shuls to specifically the Beit Midrash environment, and questions of how space influences the way we learn, think, and engage in dialogue. And working in this building, certainly, my first picture here is lying down on the floor in the central portal of the Beit Midrash. I think the next one also is, right, this was done for a video, an SAR high school promotional video where they're actually supposed to be,
SAR?
yeah, it's supposed to spell out
Yeah, I see
SAR,
that.
and the
Yeah,
top
yeah.
should say B
Oh.
SAR. It was part of their BEE.
That's so cute.
And there was a photographer a videographer. This picture actually was taken by a student, I must give credit where credit is due, who runs the Humans of SAR Facebook page. And she takes all sorts of interesting shots around the building and then posts it on this Humans of SAR Facebook page, and different quotes and different comments. So, here's the actual learning and davening happening in the Beit Midrash. But this is, central part of our school and our school's identity. The idea that Torah learning should permeate the building on all levels, and not just, there's so much discussion, and I thought I would spend a lot of time on this, but it's for another lecture, just on open classroom, open environment, what that means for learning, and that conversation of itself has to, can cover a whole series, but specifically just the architecture of the Beit Midrash here as being central to the mission of, the grand conversation, and bringing in all different disciplines to influence Torah, and having Torah permeate all different disciplines and all the learning that takes place in this building. Now, it poses some challenges to have all that noise, right? When it's coming, when you're testing on the 5th floor and the noise comes up. So there are certain practical kind of, I think, challenges that have to be surmounted. But the question is, okay, given those challenges, what are the ideals and the goals that we want to espouse, and which one is, not more important, but you have to balance the factors. So yes, it will not be a perfectly quiet testing environment on a given day. You have to go to a certain space. I mean, you can go, there are closed spaces and accommodations made when APs are given. They're obviously given in a place that's quiet. But that sense of, no, the noise and the openness reflects the ideology and the philosophy, and that's what, a Beit Midrash should be, and which should be like the central vein through school with the light. And it really impacts how you think and how you start engaging and interacting with the texts and you know, where people are going to study and learn and how, and when you're on the fourth floor and you're not in the Beit Midrash, but you hear something that's coming from the Beit Midrash, will that subtly and, you know, not necessarily always consciously influence just what you think about openness and kind of creativity and looking at things from a varied perspective and unique way. Even on Friday, we had a case where all the architecture kind of played out on the ground. The junior class had a tish during their advisory period, so the whole junior floor was set up with tables and singing, and then they decided to dance through school into the next period, class period, and made their way singing down to the Beit Midrash. And my Gemara class, which happens to meet in a closed room, so it's actually a more quiet space, the students were like, we must go join them. We have to go sing with them. And there you realize, like, okay, it is a lost cause, no matter how dynamic I can try to be, sitting in a classroom when there's singing that's happening and literally just permeating up the central portal where everyone is coming over and looking over. It you know, it's a crazy thing, but it's a wonderful thing. It's an amazing thing that it just, right, it brings them in. Yeah. Exactly. So starting with SAR, questions of Beit Midrash, just what that reflects.
The only thing is, I do think that it makes it harder for some students for whom distractibility is a problem.
100%.
Yeah.
So that's...
It's not for not every student can learn in an environment like this.
Definitely. And even different time, the same student at different times, different disciplines, different types of projects will need. It's not even a student that generally is fine with distractions. I have noticed just when I want someone to work on a piece of writing, right? To seriously, quietly engage with writing. It's even for a kid that's okay generally with distractions. Suddenly I say, you know what, let's all go to the library. Let's take a trip, very rarely, because in Gemara we don't have those writing pieces so often, but a reflective piece every once in a while. Let's find the closed, quiet space.
Right. My daughter went to SAR through 8th grade, from kindergarten to 8th grade, and now she's at Heschel, and she said it took some time to get used to learning in a closed classroom. This is different, you know, to get used to learning with no distractions.
Doors, you feel like constrained.
Right.
I came from a different environment, also learning in, you know, closed, quiet, no distraction, pristine, like Masudar, everything. And when I came here as a teacher, I love it. I love the philosophy and I love what it represents and how it plays out. But the first, I'll tell this publicly, as the first year was just, how do you get used to this? And how do you model your lesson? I think this is really how do you model your lesson that it's not just a lecture in the front of the room? I think that's what the space forces you to do, is think about your teaching in creative ways, so that the distractions are okay, and not just okay, but they breed creativity and they breed more engaged conversations. So I remember once in senior year when I was teaching a medical ethics elective, and we were having a very intense debate about organ donation and a Jewish medical ethics, so it's a halachic medical ethics question, and a student from another class who was walking around, went to the bathroom, whatever, like just made his way in and was standing in the sidelines and joined the conversation. It was okay, he should have been in his other class, but he contributed in a really insightful way, and I was thrilled because I felt like, well, if my door were closed, you would, even if you went to the bathroom and you came back to your class, you would have no idea what was happening in this room. And you can have people who will say, well, that's not good. He should be focusing on math and not be focusing. Right. But that was the moments when I realized, like, okay, I get it, right?
Right.
You get, as a teacher, like it was the beginning. Exactly. Yeah. Like you are now engaged. Now we need to work out exactly how the best learning takes place in every environment. But that kind of, right, the philosophy, the vision, the grand conversation, the idea that everything is all part of the larger conversation. We'll just go through a few more Batei Midrash and then open up for a conversation. This is again, there were so many Batei Midrash to choose from, so I just chose selected. This is the new Beit Midrash and Midrash at Lindenbaum, Jerusalem, the women's seminary in Jerusalem.
Wow.
It is supposed to represent, well, you tell me, what do you think? It's the architecture inside is supposed to be evoke feelings of something. What does it give you the sense of? I don't know if it's...
I don't know. Tell me.
it's supposed to feel like a tent. I guess the
Right.
white
I
beams
can
and the
understand
white
that.
light, like,
I wouldn't
you know, when
have
you
thought that,
imagine
yeah.
sort of an old Canaanite wandering Bedouin family with a white sheath on top.
I see
Apparently that is what it is supposed to symbolize and evoke, whether it's the tent of, you know, Ohel Shel Torah. Perhaps, and I heard this from somebody who works for the institution at Or Torah Stone, Ohel Shel Ha'imahot, right? Sarah's tent, and what that represents. It's a specific women's Beit Midrash, so perhaps. But again, this is, you know, I tried to track down for a number of different Batei Midrash in particular a design statement. I had a bit of a harder time. You know, people have, oh, it's supposed to be this, and in an article, so-and-so is quoted as saying it's supposed to give the feeling of a fire. But I'll keep digging, but I didn't have an easy time finding like institutions have mission statements. You know, here's our design statement, which I just thought was, I'm sure that it was right thought out, but maybe not publicly accessible. From Lincoln Square Synagogue, actually, Rabbi Robinson sent me, I don't know if it was an official piece, but it had, excuse me, design elements articulated. Sorry.
Go ahead, take your time.
Let's I think I'll close with this space, which is Yeshivat Har Etzion, the Gush Beit Midrash. Just some pictures. Supposed to resemble from the outside an eagle with its expansive wings, and you know what you don't see from the picture is the foothills of the Judean desert and the mountains in the Gush Etzion region. It's the idea of an eagle soaring over that space. Sorry.
Don't be. Nothing to be sorry for.
And here's the internal architecture. Again, lots of light, windows in the Beit Midrash.
Beautiful.
And here's where the, you know, kind of internal, external, when you look out those windows, and here a lot of people actually have written about the influence of this space, and I was able to find, well, bring it full circle in the first week when we read the piece by Dr. Joshua Berman on the temple, and he had written extensively about the temple in his introduction when talking about this, sort of creating sacred space and the sanctity of the temple. He talks about, in the dedication introduction, he talks about the years that he spent in this space, right, in the Gush Beit Midrash space, looking out at the mountains and the hills of Israel, Jerusalem, in the distance, and how that influenced his perception, discussion, and his research on the temple and the Mishkan, really, from being in an environment that was so conducive to thinking about space. So here's, again, someone reflecting on it years later in writing his own perceptions of space, coming from a space that really was humbling in many ways to be inside. There are so many examples, and I just, picked a few to give us a sense of kind of what are the different considerations, how do the considerations play out on the ground, and then how do they play out historically. So some of these places, I guess it would be great to look at in 50 years. What is, the next time a major remodeling comes along, what worked and what didn't work in the modern conceptions of space here.
Thank you, Hecht-Koller.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was very interesting.